Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, April 5th, 2024. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Biden and Netanyahu discuss the killing of aid workers. So President Biden on Thursday spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the targeted Israeli killing of 7 workers for the World Central Kitchen. According to the White House readout of the call, Biden took a harsher tone with Netanyahu than before, but it's unclear right now if this rhetoric will amount to a change of this policy of unconditional military support for the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So the White House said, quote, President Biden emphasized that the strikes on humanitarian workers and the overall humanitarian situation are unacceptable. He made clear the need for Israel to announce and implement a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. He made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps, end quote. So this definitely sounds like a shift. The question is, how much pressure are they really putting on Israel? So I first wrote this story up, and I was pretty skeptical of if Israel will do anything. And then later on Thursday night, I believe early Friday morning in Israel, the Israeli cabinet approved a series of steps to allow more aid into Gaza, and that includes the opening of another border crossing into Gaza, a border crossing that goes into northern Gaza where people are starving. You know, it's the worst situation for the Palestinians in Gaza is in the north. And they also apparently agreed to use Israel's port of Ashdod as a hub for humanitarian supplies. The White House said that it welcomed these steps and that they should be implemented immediately. So we'll see if they follow through on this. I know earlier on there were certain things Israel said that they were going to do, but then they didn't end up doing them, like letting in that U.S.-funded flour shipment that apparently has been sitting in the port for months. But I mean, I think this goes to show, if they follow through with this, that how much Biden could have gotten Israel to do over the past 6 months, you know, just to make some vague threat here, which this seems pretty vague, the threat, at least what they're putting out publicly. And to see Israel's cabinet approve stuff like this right after the call, I think it goes to show the leverage that the U.S. does have over Israel and how much power Biden has to stop this thing. And U.S. officials also have not said what steps the U.S. that they wanted. Like, they didn't say what specific steps that they want Israel to take, and they didn't say what consequences there would be if Israel didn't do enough. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, was asked about all this, and he said, quote, I'm not going to preview any potential policy decisions coming forward, end quote. Kirby also said that Biden has been a friend and partner of Israel throughout his entire political career and said that that's not going to change. So the White House readout of the Biden-Netanyahu call also said that Biden underscored the need for an immediate ceasefire. That's another shift in language there. But it also kind of suggested that the ceasefire that he's talking about would be linked to a hostage deal. I'll just read what the White House said. The readout said, quote, he underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians, and he urged the Prime Minister to empower his negotiators to conclude a deal without delay to bring the hostages home, end quote. In the call, Biden also expressed U.S. support for Israel as it is preparing for a potential Iranian retaliation over the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria. So backing Israel when it comes to that. The readout said, quote, the two leaders also discussed public Iranian threats against Israel and the Israeli people. President Biden made clear that the United States strongly supports Israel in the face of those threats. So let's hope that this turns into something, that this isn't just rhetoric or some sort of PR effort here by Biden to make it look like he's doing something. Let's hope when he says that there should be an immediate ceasefire that he's going to do something to make sure that that happens and really use the leverage that the U.S. has here, because that's what they need, is a ceasefire and a real humanitarian effort in Gaza to stop the deaths, the people from starving to death and everything. Of course, I'm not, I have my doubts, but we'll just see. We'll see what happens here. And this is definitely a shift, again, in the rhetoric, and let's hope it turns into something. And I think at this point, one thing that we can do with the election coming up and the Democrats worried, is put pressure on the Democrats. I just wrote my representative again right before I recorded this saying, what are you doing? You got to call for a ceasefire. This is ridiculous that you haven't at this point. You could email them and call them. I like to do both. Just add to the pressure on the Democrats. And if Biden's coming through town, wherever his campaign events are, go down there and make your voice known. All right. So the next one here, the U.S. approves the transfer of thousands of more bombs for Israel. So on the one hand, you have that story, and then on the other hand, there's this story. So the Biden administration approved another package of bombs for Israel this week that includes thousands of bombs as U.S. military aid continues to flow unimpeded to support the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So a Biden administration official told Reuters that the arms shipment includes 1,000 Mk-82 500-pound bombs, more than 1,000 small diameter bombs, and fuses for Mk-80 bombs. The bombs will be delivered by the end of the year. And this was approved on Monday. So this was approved on Monday, the same day that Israel bombed Iran's consulate in Syria, and the same day that Israel killed these aid workers. This was probably approved before that happened, because I think that was late at night that the aid workers were killed. But still, it goes to show, though there might be some things happening, they're still shipping the weapons over there. The weapons are being shipped as we speak. Again, hopefully this could get disrupted in some way. But this is on top of last week we had Biden approving other munition shipments to Israel, and those included 2,000-pound bombs and an F-35 deal worth $2.5 billion. And then there was the report that he's about to approve a $18 billion F-15 deal for Israel. So the weapons keep flowing at this point. All right, so the next one here, this is a really brutal story. Gazans in Israeli custody lose limbs due to abuse. So this article is from Haaretz. And it says a doctor at the field hospital set up at the Seda Taiman Detention Center to hold arrested Gazans described conditions that he said could compromise the inmates' health and put the government at risk of violating the law in a letter sent last week to Israel's defense ministry, health minister, and attorney general. So this physician said, quote, just this week, 2 prisoners had their legs amputated due to handcuff injuries, which unfortunately is a routine event, end quote. So they have to get limbs amputated because of the restraints that they're put in. Just think about what that means. He said that inmates are fed through straws, defecate in diapers, and are held in constant restraints, which violate medical ethics and the law. So this facility was established immediately after the outbreak of the Gaza war to hold Hamas fighters, including those who took part in the attack of October 7th, until they could be moved to a regular prison. At the time, the Knesset approved an amendment to the law on holding detainees that specified the conditions in which they could be held. Since the start of the ground operation in the Gaza Strip, most of the Gazans who have been arrested have been sent to this facility to be investigated for involvement in terrorism. Those cleared of suspicion are then sent back to Gaza. So basically what they're saying is people are being sent to these horrific conditions only to be suspected of things. And we've seen those pictures and videos of Israel rounding up men and making them strip their clothes, and sometimes looks like very young boys that are in these groups. So this doctor said, quote, "From the first days of the medical facility's operation until today, I have faced serious ethical dilemmas. More than that, I am writing this letter to warn you that the facility's operations do not comply with a single section among those dealing with health in the incarceration of unlawful combats law," end quote. He stressed that all the patients at the hospital are handcuffed by all four limbs, regardless of how dangerous they are deemed. They are blindfolded and fed through a straw. And again, I mean, said that they're defecate, they have diapers on. I mean, this is, sounds like some of the worst torture people can face here. This doctor said, quote, "Under these conditions in practice, even young and healthy patients lose weight after a week or two of hospitalization," end quote. And the hospital doesn't receive regular supplies of medical equipment or medicine. So it's just really horrific conditions. And again, these are people that could be just random people they're rounding up in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israeli embassies around the world put on high alert. So Israeli embassies around the world have been put on high alert as Israel is bracing for potential retaliation for bombing Iran's consulate building next to its embassy in Damascus, Syria. Sources told the Jerusalem Post that some Israeli ambassadors had also been warned not to attend public events due to concerns about their safety. The Israeli Foreign Ministry denied earlier reports that said Israel was evacuating many of its embassies around the world. The Israeli attack on Iran's consulate marked a huge escalation in Israel's targeting of Iranians and killed 7 members of the IRGC. Israel frequently kills Iranians in Syria, and they also carry out covert attacks inside Iran, including assassinations, drone attacks, and sabotage at nuclear sites. Iran's responses to Israeli attacks are usually very restrained, if they respond at all. But the brazen attack on an Iranian diplomatic facility, which flouts any sort of norms or international law, and this could provoke something more significant. Reuters had a report that cited unnamed Iranian officials who said that Tehran would have to give a serious response, but also said that it would be limited and aimed at deterrence. So those are Iranian sources that Reuters has. Who knows exactly how good they are, but I thought it was worth mentioning in this story. And again, a major response or a direct attack on Israel from Iran could be exactly what Israel wants. It's very clear that they're trying to provoke a major regional war. That's what Netanyahu sees for his survival. So we'll see. And again, Iran can be very patient and might not respond for a while. I don't think this is imminent, but we might see something happen. Not clear exactly what. I would be surprised if Iran hits Israel directly or anything like that, but we'll see. All right, so the next one here, 100,000 estimated to have fled from South Lebanon. So near daily strikes in southern Lebanon, this article is from Jason Ditz, by the way. Near daily strikes in southern Lebanon have sent a large portion of the population fleeing deeper into the country. So now 100,000 people of the region's 150,000 people, so most of them, have fled southern Lebanon. And since the start of the strikes in October, 313 people have been killed in Lebanon and more than 1,000 wounded. But the longer-term impact, however, may be the economic damage to the region's farming. Attacks have destroyed some 800 hectares, which is 8 million square meters of farmland. Between this and the population displacement, nearly 75% of the residents in the area have lost their ability to earn a living by farming. So they're, this is one of the big issues with Lebanon and in northern Israel. I know a lot of people are evacuated from there as well. To us, we keep saying, it's not a full-blown war yet. But if you live in this area, you are living through a war. The strikes have been that significant. And this just still, shows no sign of this idea of, the U.S. said that they were pushing for some diplomatic solution. That doesn't seem like that's made any progress at all. All right, so the next one here, Human Rights Watch says that Israel killed over 100 civilians in a potential war crime, or in an apparent war crime was how they put it. This article is from Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. A deadly Israeli airstrike on a 6-story apartment block earlier in the Gaza war likely constituted a war crime, rights group Human Rights Watch has reported, citing interviews with witnesses, satellite imagery, and photo and video evidence. More than 100 non-combatants were killed in the bombing, over half of them children. And remember the AI story I went over yesterday, that they have this AI system creating these targets specifically to bomb people while they're in their homes with their families, and they say that they can kill over 100 civilians to kill one Hamas commander, and many times they're mistaken and there's not actually a Hamas commander there. So this could have been one of those cases. I mean, it sounds exactly like that's what happened. And this just goes to show the they call it collateral damage, but it's not collateral. They're choosing to kill civilians. It's evidence of this being a genocide. So the October 31st strike targeted a residential complex known as the Engineers Building in central Gaza, situated along the Salah al-Din highway, bisecting the territory. According to a witness of the attack, the Israeli air raid came without warning, with at least 4 munitions hitting the building in a matter of seconds, leaving it completely demolished. Human Rights Watch said, quote, Human Rights Watch has found no evidence of a military target in the vicinity of the building at the time of the Israeli attack, making the strike unlawfully indiscriminate under the laws of war. Israeli authorities have provided no justification for the attack, end quote. At least 106 civilians were killed in the strike, including 54 children in one attack. And, they call it indiscriminate, but I think it's clear that they're targeting civilians. They're targeting civilians purposely. So just, there's been a lot of cases like this, but I think it's important to highlight when evidence comes out about particular attacks, particular strikes that Israel's launching. All right, so the next one here, pressure mounts on Rishi Sunak to stop arming Israel. So this article is from Joe Lauria at Consortium News. And it says more than 600 British lawyers, academics, and retired senior judges, including 3 who sat on the country's Supreme Court, have written to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak imploring him to end through lawful means acts giving rise to a serious risk of genocide, namely to stop arming Israel while it carries out atrocities in Gaza. The letter on Wednesday comes in the wake of leaked audio recordings revealing that the British government is ignoring the advice of its own lawyers not to continue supplying weapons to Israel for its Gaza operations. So this is interesting. So this letter to Sunak says, quote, the ICJ conclusion that there exists a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza has placed your government on notice that weapons might be used in its commission and that the suspension of their provision is thus a means likely to deter and or a measure to prevent genocide. The UK must take immediate measures to bring an end through lawful means, acts giving rise to a serious risk of genocide, failure to comply with its own obligations under the Genocide Convention to take all measures to prevent genocide, which were within its power, would incur UK state responsibility for the commission of an international wrong for which reparation must be made, end quote. And I know a lot of MPs, members of the British Parliament, have been calling for an end to aid to Israel, especially since they just killed 3 British citizens in the attack on the aid workers. And even conservative MPs of the ruling Conservative Party are also pressuring Sunak about this. So the pressure grows, and I know Australia is unhappy. Poland is very unhappy that they killed some of their own, and all this pressure just continues to build. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and the U.K. have bombed Yemen 148 times in 80 days. So at least 148 strikes have hit Yemen since the U.S. and the U.K. launched a new bombing campaign against the Houthis in January, and this is according to the Yemen Data Project. And the Yemen Data Project said in the first 80 days of the U.S.-led bombing campaign that started on January 12th, a total of 339 munitions have hit Yemen, averaging more than 4 per day. And I know the Yemen Data Project, they track the Saudi airstrikes in Yemen for a very long time, and they're always very conservative in their estimates. It's always what they can record and track. So this is, I say, at least 148 strikes, at least 339 munitions dropped would be a conservative estimate, which is just completely out of control. And it seems like nobody's paying attention to this. Even myself, I feel like I haven't been covering this enough. The good, I guess it's not good news, but at least there hasn't been many people killed in these strikes. I mean, more people have been killed. Nobody should be being killed by U.S. and British bombs in Yemen. But anyway, the Yemen Data Project said that there was a drop in strikes in March, with 35 recorded for the month of March, compared with 79 in February. The group said there were no reports of civilian casualties in March, after 11 were recorded in February. And that's 1 civilian that was killed and 10 who were injured. Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi said in March that a total of 34 Houthi fighters had been killed since the Yemeni group, officially known as Ansar Allah, began targeting Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea last year in its response to the onslaught in Gaza. The U.S.-British bombing campaign has done nothing to deter the Red Sea attacks and has only escalated the situation. And they keep bombing Yemen. We have another story on it. The next one is interesting. The U.S. suggests diplomacy with the Houthis as the bombing campaign has failed. So Tim Lenderking, who's President Biden's envoy for Yemen, said the U.S. wants a diplomatic solution with the Houthis as its bombing campaign has failed to deter the Yemeni group and has only escalated the situation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Lenderking said, quote, "My hope is that we can find diplomatic off-ramps," end quote. Wouldn't it have been nice if they thought of that in the first place? He suggested that the U.S. could reverse its recent decision to redesignate the Houthis as specially designated global terrorists, which imposed new sanctions that are blocking a peace deal between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. Lenderking said the U.S. is looking to, quote, "find ways to de-escalate and allow us to pull back, eventually the designation, and, of course, to end the military strikes on Houthi military capability," end quote. So the Houthis have been clear. The diplomatic solution is an end to the genocidal campaign in Gaza. Lenderking has previously acknowledged that he believes the Houthis would be true to their word and would stop the Red Sea attacks if there was a ceasefire in Gaza. He just said this recently. So, he knows how to end these attacks. Since Biden, I summarized the strikes, the one that I just went over. And U.S. Central Command said on Wednesday that there was more strikes in Yemen, so they're continuing to bomb Yemen. And the Houthis, who, again, are officially known as Ansar Allah, they're falsely called rebels all the time in Western media, the Houthi rebels. But they've controlled Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, since 2014, and they govern the area of Yemen where most people live, where 70 to 80% of Yemenis live. They govern what most of the territory that used to be North Yemen before the country, North and South Yemen, became one country. In 1990, I believe, is when that happened. And, of course, the U.S. backed a brutal war, Saudi-UAE war against the Houthis, that killed at least 377,000 people, according to the UN estimates, which are considered to be low. And that's more than half of those people were children who died of starvation and disease. I mean, it's just a brutal, on par with what's happening in Gaza. And now the U.S. has just been bombing the country, and it's impacting aid in Yemen and all sorts of things like that. All right, so the next one here. Blinken vows that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. So they're not dropping this pipe dream. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Thursday vowed that Ukraine will eventually join NATO, repeating a provocative promise that the alliance first made at a summit in Bucharest in 2008. So Blinken said this while he was in Brussels alongside Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, and NATO foreign ministers met in the Belgium capital to prepare for a NATO summit that will be held in Washington this July. So the annual big NATO leader summit is being held in the U.S. this summer. Blinken said, quote, Ukraine will become a member of NATO. Our purpose of the summit is to help build a bridge to that membership and to create a clear pathway for Ukraine moving forward, end quote. So, of course, Ukraine's membership in NATO, its potential membership in NATO, is a big factor, one of the biggest factors in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Leading up to the invasion, Russia was seeking a guarantee from the U.S. that Ukraine would never join the alliance. The Biden administration refused to give them anything like that. They didn't even seriously engage on that issue, something a State Department official admitted after the invasion. And since the invasion was launched, we've seen this from NATO officials and that, we're going to bring Ukraine into NATO. Don't worry about it. But there's no clear timeline or assurances, because if they bring Kiev into the alliance now, even Biden has said that means war with Russia, and they're not going to go willing to do that. And Zelensky was really angry. He was really upset last year. If you remember the Vilnius summit in Lithuania, the last year's NATO summit, he wanted some sort of timeline, some sort of clear pathway to NATO, and he didn't get it. NATO just put out a vague statement that said it will be in a position to invite Ukraine, formally invite Ukraine to join when allies agree and conditions are met. So completely vague. So they're not giving Ukraine a clear path. Blinken saying that they might announce some things, but who knows? I think what they're doing here is they're using this potential membership. They're just dangling it over Russia's head, over Ukraine's head, just to keep this proxy war going, to continue this mess. And the Ukrainian leadership now is so dug into this proxy war, to this war, that they're not going to break with the U.S. and make a deal that would give away a chunk of Ukrainian territory. And I mentioned in here that back in 2008, before the Bucharest summit, William Burns, who is the head of the CIA now, at the time he was a director, he was the ambassador to Russia, he warned in a cable that was released by WikiLeaks that promising Ukraine NATO membership was a huge red line for Russia, and that it could lead to a civil war in Ukraine. I mean, that's what he says explicitly in his cable. But they went ahead and did it anyway, and they still continue to do this, to say these things. So this next one here is very interesting. U.S. official admits that the Ukraine proxy war is failing to weaken Russia. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone, and a top U.S. official said that Russia has reconstituted nearly all of its military losses in Ukraine. And a core objective for the U.S.'s proxy war in Ukraine was to weaken Russia. That's something Lloyd Austin said at the very beginning. And this is how the hawks in Congress are continuing this thing, saying, oh, we're really killing a lot of Russians, really hurting their military. Well, here, this is Kurt Campbell, who's the new Deputy Secretary of State. He said, quote, we have assessed over the course of the last couple of months that Russia has almost completely reconstituted militarily, end quote. Now, this is interesting. I saw someone say this on Twitter, and I forgot who, so I can't give them credit. But so he's the Deputy Secretary of State. Victoria Nuland was just recently the acting Deputy Secretary of State. She would never admit this. I mean, the stuff that she's been saying has been completely off base with reality, completely unhinged. And here you have Kurt Campbell saying, their entire military completely built back up. So it's interesting. And now Campbell's he's a China hawk. So he might be saying behind the scenes, all right, enough with this Ukraine proxy war. We got to shift everything over to Taiwan and China, so it's just interesting. And Kyle mentions that in April of 2022, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced that this weakening Russia was a goal of this whole thing. All right, the next one here, Russian defense minister warns the French against sending troops to Ukraine. So Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu spoke with France's defense minister on Wednesday. They discussed the Crocus Hall terrorist attack in Moscow, and the French side said gave their condolences, said that the France and Russia should cooperate on counterterrorism stuff. But they also discussed all this talk from Macron, the French president. I said before, they'll never go to war directly with Russia for Ukraine. I mean, at the same time, you got Macron talking about sending troops to Ukraine, and he didn't drop it. He didn't just say it once. He's been talking about it quite a bit. So Shoigu, his message was, don't send troops to Ukraine. It would create problems for France. That was kind of his warning. And of course, all this talk about troops has highlighted the fact that there is a small number of NATO Special Operations Forces in Ukraine, including a handful of French soldiers. The Discord leak said as of March 2023, so over a year ago, there was 15 French soldiers there. But that's not what Macron's talking about. He's talking about a bigger public deployment, and Russia is saying this is going to make war inevitable, NATO-Russia war inevitable. So it's a completely insane thing to talk about, yet Macron keeps talking about it. So that is it for the news for today. That was a lot of stuff. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Dubravka Zarkov, Language in the War on Gaza. One from Nick Terse, U.S. Epic Fail in Niger. One from Ted Snyder, The Growing Fissures in NATO Unity. One from Doug Bandow, Why Care About Kosovo. And one from W. James Antle III, McConnell's Fight Against Phantom Isolationists. So that's everything. You go check out our blog. Lots of stuff there. Lots of stuff in the lower section of the page about Gaza and other things. Just so much going on. This was a really busy, crazy week. Really horrific news. So maybe, I don't know. It seems like that killing of those aid workers, unfortunately for the Palestinians, it seems like killing of the Western aid workers is what has turned a lot of people on this war, that this genocide that's happening. Many people just don't seem to care when Palestinians are killed, but it's waking more people up, and hopefully this keeps moving in this direction. So anyway, I hope everybody has a good weekend. You could always support this show by sharing it, liking, subscribing on YouTube, wherever you watch, Rumble. Leave a review if you listen to the podcast version. But I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.